Hello, I'm Joan, Kjaer, and this is WorldCanvass. Thank you for being with us tonight for our program focusing on Asia. WorldCanvass is presented by International Programs, your global intersection connecting Iowa with the world in a university without borders. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us in the Senate chamber of the Old Capitol tonight. This program will be broadcast over UI-TV and KRUI-FM, and we're streaming the program live over International Programs' website, which is accents.international.uiowa.edu. We have a wonderful program planned, so glad you could be with us. And we'll begin with music, so please welcome our first guests. Next to me here is William Jones, the conductor of the University of Iowa Symphony. Good to have you. And next to him is Kjaer Zhou.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for being with us, and don't be afraid to speak up. And at the very end is Su Zhang. Yes. Thank you for coming. So, a warm hand, huh? You can see that there's a gorgeous instrument just off to the side of the stage here, and Sue will be playing that in a little while, and she'll explain what this instrument is. And those of you who came early had a chance to hear it. It's just gorgeous. And we had hoped to have a live performance by our pipa player, and she is Kjaer, the young woman sort of in the center of this group. But you'll have to explain what happened to your pipa recently.
Two string of the pipa is broken, so I can't play today. Maybe sometime in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, sometime in the future, absolutely. But we are interested in hearing a little bit about musical culture in Asia, musical culture in China. And I think I will first go to William for a little bit of an overview of his experience. We're going to end with William as well, because we have a musical cut we'd like to play, a concerto selection. But I know this is kind of fun for you to meet artists from other countries, and particularly Asia, where you have a kind of a fondness, I know.
Well, I've had the opportunity for the past few years to do conducting in China, and a lot of my research that I started doing on Chinese Western fusion music was a result of being able to do a sabbatical in China. And a lot of this was stimulated, at least the interest in this country, with the great success of Tan Dun's movie score for Crouching Tiger, am I right? Hidden Dragon. If I always get them turned around. And which he used Chinese folk songs with sort of avant-garde Western compositional styles. And that's sort of what has always been my interest, was finding the traditional Chinese instruments that are used as solo instruments with the Western orchestras that Western instrumentation that we use. And so that brought me to a lot of the other conducting that I've done, including this past December. I had the chance to go to Kedah, Malaysia, and conduct a traditional Chinese orchestra, which I studied very hard just to be able to know the name of the instruments, much less how they were played and what one does. So that was a wonderful experience.
Well, that's good, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some of this fusion music that you brought with us this afternoon. Let me go next to you, Kjaer, and maybe you could tell us about the pipa. I think probably our audience has some kind of familiarity with the pipa. We would think of it as looking something like a lute, I think. But I wonder if you can describe this instrument.
Yeah. Pipa is also known as the Chinese lute. It has 4 strings, and unfortunately, I broke 2 of them.
Oh.
Yeah. And it's peak-shaped. It belongs to the plucked instrument of Chinese traditional music instrument. And the music is pretty gentle, and it can bring you to the Asian Chinese culture. I like it.
When did you start to play? How old were you?
It's about 3 years ago, because I have to prepare for exams then. So it's pretty older.
Yeah. With the instrument we have on stage here, I'll ask you to explain, Sue. It's also a plucked instrument, but quite different from the pipa.
Yeah, it's a plucked instrument, so it's in the same class. But pipa you play like upright, but this is you either use the stands or you can put it on the table, and you just need to adjust in the seat. and those become one set. And as long as you're comfortable with the height of your seat and the stand, and you practice with that setting, you sort of get your zone. So it doesn't have to be one way or another.
Yeah.
So, and traditionally the instrument, the strength of the instrument can be like 13 to 26. Mine's 21. I think after 1980s. So the sort of standardization, so it's manufactured. It's easy to manufacture, so nowadays all the instruments are 21 strings. It's made of one piece of wood and with a little bridges on top, and you play most on the right, and you use your left hand to sort of adjusting and give some ornaments to it. And it can be pricey, this instrument, depends on the wood and depends on the decorations. Mine's just okay, because my parents paid for it. And some decorations, if you use like jade or some very pricey stone, it can be a very invaluable piece as well. So.
And the name of the instrument is?
Is guzheng. I played since I was 11. I was into playing ping pong, and my best friend was practicing violin. So every day after school, I had to go to my best friend's place, waiting for her. I wait for an hour and a half, so that she can finish her practice and we can go out and play ping pong. And so I went back and complained to my mom. My mom said, "I didn't know you're actually wasting an hour and a half waiting for someone play violin. You got to pick up something." So that was the starting of the story. So, yeah.
Well, I think everybody would like to know something about each of you. Why don't we start with you, Kjaer, and tell us where you're from and what you're studying here at the university.
I'm from the northeast part of China. It's called Shenyang City, Liaoning Province. And I'm an actual science and economics major. This is my first year. I've only been in Iowa for 8 months, but I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my name's Sue, and I've been in Iowa City for 6-7 years now. I came here 2001. I finished my undergrad, came here for grad program in physiology. I was shooting for PhD. I ended up getting master, and I came here for PhD in pharmacology because I want to work for industry. Didn't work. I switched pharmacy school, start MBA the next year. So I'm getting PharmD and MBA in May. So yay!
And what compelled you to bring this amazing instrument all the way from China?
Oh, I mean, it's become cliche. It's my mom again. She said, you know, you go into a different country. It's a way to meet people. It's a way to make friends. Bring it with you. So I thought it was wise. Yeah.
Well, I know that you've prepared a couple of pieces that you're going to play for us, and we'll send you to the instrument in just a second. Would you describe what you're going to play?
Yeah, I think I'm going to try 2 pieces because this instrument traditionally was developed for meditation and purify your own thoughts. It's a very scholarly instrument. The music isn't developed for amusing purpose, like I'm not playing for the others, I'm playing for myself. And there's lots of great stories in Chinese history of one play one instrument and made a great friend, like the soulmate of this person, because this has that sort of power. But so I'm gonna play a kind of traditional music, so you kind of get a sense of what Asian music would be like. Then I'm gonna play a more modern music. It's a happier, louder, more complicated technique. Although, you know, I'm in pharmacy school and I'm in MBA program. I don't really have a whole lot of time to practice, so bear with me. I just want you to get a sort of experience of this evolving.
Great, wonderful. Well, please go ahead and get yourself settled there at the instrument, and
sounds good.
Look forward to hearing it.
So it's like other Asian musical instruments. It's pentatonic, so it's 5 notes per octave. Yes. So this is the first one. It's very quiet, and my teacher, he's a very strict teacher, and he's a very arrogant person. He's a composer himself, and he plays this music with such emotion around him. He made that music just as part of himself, and he always says, you know, everyone's different. Music can be the same, but no one's going to replicate your music. It's the same music, but everyone plays it differently. So the second one, it's a more modern music. It's called Yizu Wuqu. If there's Chinese sitting here, Yizu is a minority group in China. Although China is on another side of the world, Chinese people look the same, but actually we have 56 different ethnic groups in China, and Yizu is one minority group. Han people counts for like 95% of general population. So for the other 55, Yizu just one of the 55. And this music was sort of describing a festival in ethnic group. It's sort of like their New Year. So, and they dance around when time comes every year.
beautiful. And that was a
It
performance.
rough at the-
Oh,
My finger cannot really follow my thoughts. Thanks.
well, to us, I'm sure it didn't sound rough at all. It was beautiful. And for
thank you
those of
very
you who didn't
much.
catch
That
your
was-
name coming in, this is Su Zhang.
Yes.
Performing on Guzheng.
Guzheng, yes,
Guzheng. Yeah. Well, now let's turn to William. Tell us something about your reaction to this performance and these pieces and these sounds.
Oh, it's wonderful. The tuning and the scale itself is, as you'd mentioned, is a pentatonic scale, a 5-note scale, and we find that as far as I know, all folk music is based on the pentatonic scale, just like we have with our Native Americans in this country, or Africans. If you listen to the Negro spirituals, they're all based on the pentatonic scale, and I think that's sort of the way maybe the older cultures music was, except for those that came from Europe. And for some reason, it ended up being a diatonic scale, the 7-note scale, and then with all the half steps. But this uses all of the little cracks that we don't have in our instruments, where you can mash the string down and get the quarter tones and not just half steps and things, which makes it much more personal and much more inflective and reflective than everything being squished into a perfect scale on the piano.
Oh, yeah. Well, now, you brought a sample of music on CD for us to listen to. Why don't you describe this piece?
Yes. About 10 years ago, I had a chance to conduct the Butterfly Lovers Concerto. And it was the first time I was introduced to this particular piece. And it's the story that we would know from every culture has a Romeo and Juliet story also. The only thing is this precedes Shakespeare probably about 2,000 years. And it's this couple of young people that meet each other in school. And they're in school for 3 years. She goes to school disguised as a boy because girls were not allowed to go to school for an education. So she disguises herself as a boy and they live together as roommates for 3 years. He never caught on. That's kind of interesting. But then when she had invited him to visit her, and that's when he found out that he was a she. But they came from different levels of families, and therefore her parents denied their relationship, and he died of a broken heart. And as he was then buried and she was going off to be married to someone else, they stopped at the place where his grave was. And she got out of the boat, and then she asked for the grave to open up, which it did, and she jumped in so she could be with him, and out of the grave rose 2 butterflies. And it's a wonderful little story. And this is for Western Instrument Orchestra and Erhu, which is the 2-string violin.
Yeah. Let's hear a little of that.
It's actually three movements, so it's a real concerto, and this is just sort of the introduction to it that sets up the story. And orchestras now exist in China based on kind of the same voicing that we have from the Western orchestras that have been going on for years. Prior to the Baroque period, we started putting together groups of instruments into consorts. But in China, the orchestra was made up of all of these individual solo instruments. And so the orchestras actually have only been around since maybe the late 20s, early 30s, where they started putting together erhus with gushings and guans and ditsas and sonas, the oboe trumpet kind of instrument, and trying to make soprano, alto, tenor, bass kind of sounds out of all of those instruments into a musical consort. And so orchestral music that's being composed now in the major conservatories in Shanghai and Beijing and Wuhan, and the composers are just now beginning to actually write for this type of music rather than solo kinds of things and or Western orchestras. And in this country, we have a lot of our new musicians. When I say new musicians, those that are still living, Bright Xing and Tan Dun himself and Zhou Long are all here teaching either at Columbia or Juilliard, and it's not unlike what we had during the 30s and 40s when we received Schoenberg and Hindemith and Bartok because of the war things there that came over and became our main teachers. So we're learning a lot from these new young teachers on how to combine the sounds of their traditional instruments with our Western instruments and how to support them. And the three main instruments that seem to be featured as soloists, the erhu, the pipa, and the ditsa, the flute family. And
I think there's this little yangqing.
In the yangqing, yes, which is this is like a harp from our standpoint, and the other is like a hammered zither. And much the same kind of sound, only using those wonderful little mallets. But we don't have very many players yet in this country. We all have to kind of import people in, and I think more and more we'll have people that can feature the instruments here as well. So.
Yeah. So if you don't find pharmacy fulfilling, you can take your instrument on the road, huh?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I wish we had more time to talk about music and to enjoy more of your playing, but I just want to say thank you very, very much, all of you, for introducing us.
You're very welcome.
And
thank
particular thanks, to you, Sue, and Kajing, thank you. And we will, when you have your pipa repaired, we'll have another opportunity to hear you.
Yeah, I will have it, bring it back to China.
Yes.
Have it repaired.
Yes, good. And William, thank you, as always, so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Please say thank you to our guests. Great. Thank you. This is WorldCanvass from International Programs, your global intersection at the University of Iowa, connecting students, faculty, and Iowans with one another and the world. I'm Joan Kjaer. If you're interested in all things international, please take the opportunity to check out the International Programs website, and you'll find all sorts of interesting information about people and projects, original articles and commentary, and links to events with an international focus. And that website is accents.international.uiowa.edu. And just now we're welcoming our next guests to the stage. Very happy to be able to introduce these two gentlemen. I will start with the man who's just next to me here. He is a legislator from Taiwan who is here at the university for a short period of time, and he is Mr. Chung Chun Wang. Please welcome him. And next to Mr. Wang is a good friend who works with the Center for Asian and Pacific Studies. He's the assistant director there, and his name is Dongwang Liu. Welcome, Dongwang. Well, Dongwang will give you a little more background on Mr. Wang's visit here, and Dongwang will also translate for us. And first, I think I'll go to you, Dongwang, and ask you to talk a little bit about CAPS, the Center for Asian and Pacific Studies, and tell us what that center is involved in, and then you can introduce us to Mr. Wang.
Thank you, Joan. The UI Center for Asian and Pacific Studies was established in 1986. With a general endowment gift from the E&M Charities and the Stanley family in Muscatine, Iowa. So we were very grateful for that. And the mission of the program is for promoting understanding of Asian culture and societies. And we support research and teaching and outreach on East Asia and Southeast Asia. And we also hold conferences and workshops and lectures, and also a series of lectures to academically and socially and culturally on Asia and Southeast Asia. We also host visiting scholars and like Mr. Wang from East Asia, either government or institutes of higher learning, and so give them a chance to do their research here. In their fields, and also hopefully they will facilitate exchanges for UI faculty to go to East Asia to do research and teaching.
Mm-hmm. Well, a very brief introduction here with Mr. Wang. He has served 2 terms at a city as a city councilor, 5 terms as a legislator, and he's been a teacher also at 2 different institutions. He's involved in many different associations. He was the founder of the EarthShare Foundation, and is considered a convener of the National Defense Committee, the Finance Committee, Economics Committee, and Transportation Committee. We had a discussion a couple of weeks ago and talked about a few very direct questions I would ask him, and Dong Wang will translate for us. And so briefly, I'd just like you to tell us something about yourself, Mr. Wang, and your role within the Taiwanese government.
让你稍微的介绍一下你自己，然后以及你的立法的情况、立委的情况，你在立委的情况。
我从台湾嘉义县选出的立法委员，我现在已经担任6届的立委。
Mr. Wang is from Taiwan in the Jiayi County, and now he's in his 6th term in the Taiwan Senate.
我毕业于台湾大学会计研究所，也在道江管理学院担任过老师、教师的工作。我长期在经济及能源委员会担任召集委员，这次到爱荷华来担任访问学者，主要是因为我个人觉得爱荷华跟嘉义是很相近的一个农业以农业为主的一个州，而且我们觉得台湾目前面临的一个是治水的问题，也就是洪水的问题。爱荷华在前年也碰到过洪水的问题。另外一个，它同样的面对了很多农业上的问题，以及我们知道的，我们在芝加哥跟爱荷华这边很多再生能源已经到一个成熟的阶段，我觉得这个都是有我们从台湾来这边学习的一个主要的一个方向跟目标。
I'll try to summarize. He has been a chair in several committees involving agriculture, legislation in agriculture, and water management. And he comes to here because Iowa is quite an agricultural state. And he has been working in these fields in legislation for quite some years, and also he mentioned in recent years there have been quite some problems with water management in Taiwan, and Iowa experienced a huge flood in year 2008, and so he hopes through his stay here and doing research, he can find some agenda to connect the two places, and so hopefully will benefit Taiwan.
I understand there is a connection with Iowa and one of your former presidents from Taiwan, the fourth president, Lee Teng-hui. Said it wrong, perhaps, but he got a master's degree at Iowa State University, I think.
他在讲就是以前的李登辉总统在那个
Iowa State University，
Yeah.
他是在这边念研究硕士的农业方面的硕士，所以我们知道这边是农业很强的一个州。
He got his Lee Teng-hui got his master's degree in agricultural economy from Iowa State University.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you are traveling around our state a little bit, meeting with various people in government and business and working here. What are your impressions of Iowa and of our area, this university? What do you think of this place?
他就问一下你的基本的印象，在爱华的这个基本的印象是什么？
因为爱华基本上它是一个农业州，跟我们嘉义县大致上是一样的，所以我们感觉到这边的爱华的居民非常非常的友善，而且非常非常的单纯，也非常非常的和蔼。我们感觉到这是一个相当淳朴的一个地方，我非常喜欢爱华这个地方。
He said he likes Iowa City very much, and the state of Iowa is more like his county in Jiayi in Taiwan, and he said people here are simple and sincere, and people are very friendly, and this is what he enjoys staying here.
I think we're all happy to hear that. And when do you return to Taiwan?
他说你什么时候回台湾？
原则上我是大概在我的课程大概在五月初可以结束，我希望大概在5月份告一个段落之后就回台湾。
He'll be leaving Iowa City for Taiwan in early May.
In early May. Oh, well, we are very grateful that you would take this time to join us. Thank you very much. Please, everyone, thank Mr. Wang and Zhang Wang.
Thank you very much.
And I also have to thank Dong Wang for something else. He helped us find Sue and Kjaer, who performed in our prior segment. He knows everybody, it seems, at the University of Iowa, particularly those with an Asian connection. So I say thank you also to Dong Wang for that. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next two guests. I think this will be a really interesting segment. We're going to talk a little bit about the political issues, concerns, particularly those connecting the United States and China, Asia more generally. And for that, I'll introduce our two guests. Just next to me is Brian Lai, who is an associate professor in political science here at the University of Iowa. And Wenfang Tang is just one seat over with me here as well, and he is professor and C. Maxwell and Elizabeth M. Stanley Family and Hua Xia Chair of Chinese Culture and Institutions, also part of the political science department here in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. So please give them a warm welcome. So this is kind of fun, huh? Start out with a little music and then meet Mr. Wang, and now we can have a discussion about Chinese, American political issues, cultural, what should I say, cultural traditions that make it in our way once in a while of a sort of a constructive conversation. Brian, you were kind enough to write a commentary that was in the Press Citizen published today, and it concerned very broadly these questions. Where are we headed in the relationship between China and the United States? I wonder if I could go first to you and ask you to talk a little bit about the sort of large question, is China a threat?
Sure. So I guess it really depends on who you ask, and I'd sort of say about a little over 40% of Americans say yes. And so the question is, why are so many people perceiving China as a threat in the future? Now, a lot of it stems from China's economic rise, and so most economists predict that in the next decade to the next 25 years, China will overtake the U.S. in terms of total economic size, something for most Americans they haven't seen in their lifetime. That is, the U.S. being the second largest economy is something we have been experiencing in quite some time. So for many people, what this raises is the question of when China is the largest economy, and presumably almost equal to us in military power, what will that mean when we diverge with China on issues? And as we'll talk about later, there are a lot of issues we diverge with China on. And the concern is for why China is a threat is that once they are the top economic power and once they have sufficient military power to challenge us, they will challenge us, and we won't have the same position to counter their policy goals that may differ from ours. So to give you an example, China actively does not want to pursue broader sanctions against Iran, counter to what the U.S. wants. Now, the concern is in 20 years, when China is a much stronger state than us, what will that mean for how the international system looks for the U.S.? Will it be sufficiently different because of China's policy preferences to present a real threat to America's interests?
So Wenfang, we've set up a little dialectic here. Brian will sort of present one point of view, and Wenfang might counter and say, well, let's hear what you have to say.
Well, I guess I have to present the other side of this view, even if I agree with some of what Brian has already said. And China has been flashing its muscles, in a number of international events. One example is this Copenhagen International Environmental Conference. China took a very tough stand. But let me just say that. Present this view of China not as a threat. Normally people will look at this general size of the economy of a country and being alarmed, looking at China, the total size of Chinese economy is going to surpass the United States in the next 10, 20 years. But the other measure of national power, particularly economic power, is that you have to divide this pie by the population. If you do that, that number becomes much smaller. Currently, probably the per capita GDP in China is around $4,000, or in the US, it's more than $40,000. So there's China's, in terms of per capita GDP, China is only 10% of the United States. So even the total size of the GDP is going to catch up with the United States for China in the next decade or two. The per capita GDP, the living standard will catch up probably in a much longer period of time, 50, 80 years. And also it's much more uncertain. Maybe for the 10 years, next 20 years, you see the trend of increase in China, but when it gets to a certain level, it becomes much more difficult to improve the economy for China.
Mm-hmm. And I suspect economy isn't the only question strategic thinkers, long-term planners have in mind when it comes to China and this whole notion of a threat. It's not only the economy.
No, it's not just the economy. I think what really plagues most policymakers about China as a threat is, and why they look at total economic size, is that unlike, say, a country unlike a group like the EU currently rivals the U.S. in economic size, but is a strong ally of the U.S. Most EU members are NATO members, and so the concern is that the U.S. and China have several outstanding disputes between them. And while we have disputes with countries like Iran, North Korea, and Russia, these countries don't have the economic power, the military power to really challenge us. So the big fear of China is you have both a lot of issues in dispute as well as the ability to challenge the U.S. And so some of these issues, are perhaps harder to address. So, for example, Taiwan presents itself as a real concern for the U.S., especially given that we don't control what the Taiwanese people want, right? That is, if they were to make some drives for independence, or conversely, if China were to sort of not want to continue to be, sort of pursue a peaceful approach to integrating Taiwan, the U.S. would be caught in what to do in trying to defend Taiwan. Similarly, the U.S. is just concerned about China's rate of military spending. That is, it's not very transparent. Most American policymakers estimate that China spends about double than what they actually say they spend. And so the concern is that their military modernization may soon challenge the U.S. in critical regions. And beyond that, there's sort of this issue of how we look at other countries in the world. That is, how do we deal with Iran and North Korea and countries that we have, presumably, these are generally non-democratic countries. How do we deal with these countries? And for the U.S., China presents a real threat in the sense that their preferences for how to deal with these countries are often driven more by their economic concern compared to our view of how these countries might challenge the international community. And finally, the economics plays a big role. That is, one of the U.S.'s major concerns about China is that we don't think that they treat us fairly economically. That is, when you ask people, is China an economic threat, it's about 75% of Americans identify China as an economic threat to the United States. And that has to do simply with, if you see headlines, and you simply sort of look at China's sort of economic policy, they maintain a sort of artificially low currency. We have this sort of huge trade imbalance, and they're much more vocal these days about criticizing American economic policy than they have ever been in the past. So during the most recent financial crisis, they've squarely put the blame on American policies as the basis for America's financial crisis, something that we haven't really seen them do in the past. So for most policymakers, it's sort of this differences over policies coupled with China's rising ability to potentially challenge the U.S. militarily that really starts to frighten some of them about 20 years from now, what will our relationship look like if we don't resolve a lot of these disputes?
That's a lot of points to cover. And Brian has the advantage of writing this opinion piece in today's Press Citizen, so he has all these points lined up. And I don't know whether I can cover. I may have to come back. Let me just say one thing I forgot to mention last time. When you see the trend of U.S. public opinion, like seeing China as a growing threat, Brian's said it's about only a little over 40%, and that doesn't seem to be very high. But if you look at the trend, you will see a rising trend. You see that there is a general public consensus for the China threat in public opinion. What about in China? If you take a public opinion poll in China, it's very interesting. If you ask, here's a list of countries, which one is China's number one threat? U.S., Japan, Russia, EU, all these countries. U.S., of course, is the number one threat to China's security. But if you ask another question with the same list of countries, which country China should learn the most? U.S. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you see that the feeling in China is not just bound toward unavoidable conflict with the United States. The U.S. is very popular in China, and American culture is very popular in China. My friends are watching Avatar in 3D. They asked me, "Did you watch it in 3D?" I said, "No." So they're kind of enjoying American culture in an even higher degree, I would say, probably than I am living in this country. Mm-hmm. Other point, military threat, for instance. If you I don't know whether you read today's Wall Street Journal. There's an article about Chinese military spending. It says this year, China's military spending is 7.5% increase from last year. But in the past 10 years, the average yearly increase for Chinese military spending was 19%. So it is very hard to argue for this China threat if you look at a much lower increase of military spending in China this year. And also, if you look at the other measure of military spending is this amount of military spending as percentage of GDP. And China's percentage is 1.4%. U.S. 4.9%. If you look at this, again, China's military spending is less than 10% of the total U.S. military spending. And if you talk about technology, military hardware, all these things, measures you can find, China is way, way behind. And China does not even have an aircraft carrier. Mm-hmm. How many does the United States have? Mm-hmm. I'm not an expert, but I would say more than a dozen probably. And China does not have the military ability to deploy a significant force anywhere beyond its immediate periphery. So China is not a global military power.
Well, yeah, so I guess, real quickly about that. I mean, the concern for most Americans is right. One thing is a very good point. I mean, China's military spending is roughly 10% compared to America's. America spends about $700 billion on military spending. China says about 70 billion. Pentagon estimates are about 150 billion. But regardless, that's a small percentage of American military spending. The concern is in the future, even at 2% of GDP for military spending, once China overtakes the U.S., that puts them at least at half of America's military spending. And part of that $700 billion has to do with allocations for Iraq and Afghanistan. And so the concern for most people is, what will China's military look like in 20 years? And part of that's also coupled with these concerns about whether China is either allowing, in the sense of not stopping within its own borders, or encouraging these sort of cyber warfare against the United States. So there's long been this recognition from the Pentagon that one of China's modern approaches to dealing with the sort of existing American strength would be to deny America's sort of reliance on information technology to organize its military. So right now, China's military is one thing is right, is very, not primitive, but very small compared to the American military. But the concern is, what will it look like in 20 years? And so the big concern for most American policymakers is, what do we do now? If we have this window in which we are more powerful than China now, but won't be so in 20 years, what should we do if we're concerned about that? And that's sort of where most policymakers are, and as I talk about in the paper today, where you have the split in terms of how we should approach this. And so I assume this sort of, and going back to Wenfang, this is the same kind of dialogue that goes on in China about sort of...
One point I forgot to mention, the reason for China's slower growth of military spending this year is because China has to deal with so many other social issues. Like China needs money for education, for healthcare, and so all these domestic issues, that's another example to show you that China is not as strong as people might have expected. If we think about social problems, for instance, if we talk about 10% of the population not having health care in this country, we're talking about, 30 million people probably. If we talk about 10% of the population in China not being covered by with health care, we're talking 130 million people. So any problem, domestic problem for the Chinese government is several times larger to deal with than a similar problem in this country. So even when China has more money, and China's economy is growing fast, and it has to use so much more resources to deal with domestic problems related to social services. Another problem is political stability in China. We're talking about if 10% of the population are out of work, we're talking about 130 people being unhappy. These people are much harder to deal with. They'll be sitting in front of the municipal government building and protesting against the government. And the Chinese government has to solve this problem of political legitimacy. It is a single-party state. It does not have democratic elections, and anything it does not do right, it will risk being overthrown. So many domestic issues, political, social, economic issues China has to deal with. If I may come back and address this, another very common topic is this currency issue, right? It's in the media a lot, and China has been keeping its currency at lower exchange rate against the dollar. that is, the U.S. has been asking China to revalue its currency and hoping that that would increase the U.S. export to China. But Chinese government's concern is not so much about jobs in the U.S., but if China revalues its currency, that the immediate impact is China would export less. Exporting less means more unemployment. That also means social instability. So the Chinese government is much more concerned about that than about other issues beyond its border.
Mm-hmm. I think that Wenfang's point raises a sort of a point for American policymakers. That is, China is more than willing to sort of press the U.S. today on policies that benefit China that may be damaging to the U.S. That is, they're willing to sort of say, we're not going to revalue our currency because it helps our economy, and while it may inflate our trade deficit with you, we do it because it benefits us. And historically, we've seen one single-party states often rely on nationalism, and particularly focus on external foreign policy as a means of legitimizing their government, pushing for the idea of being the dominant state, all right, is a powerful message that could legitimize the government, especially when you look internally that there's a lot, as Wenfang talked about, inside China, a lot of people really think the U.S. is trying to stop China from becoming a major power, from becoming the world's biggest power. And that type of misperception between the U.S. and China, in many ways, is worrisome for American policymakers in the sense that it could fuel, especially in China, the sense that the U.S. is itself presenting a threat, allowing Chinese leaders to mobilize Chinese public opinion against the U.S., even particularly to stall things like domestic reform. That is, domestic reform is a way of destabilizing China, which is a tool of the American government to prevent us from becoming as powerful as we want to be. So for American policymakers, there's a lot of concern that China's political regime, their desire for survival, will lead them to push for more sort of aggressive tones towards the U.S., especially when they know, given China's rising power, the U.S. has less tools to stand up against China. Today, when North Korea and Iran tries to stand up to the U.S., there's very little they can do except to do what we don't want them to do. China, on the other hand, has sort of enough currency holdings, they have international influence, and they have military power to really challenge the U.S. in global regions of the world, right? China is becoming one of the largest providers of aid to Africa. They're trying to form separate relationships in Southeast Asia. All of these are attempts to sort of hedge their relationships in case, now remember, this isn't a predetermined fact, in case things with the U.S. start to not go well. But again, as I talk about, I mean, this is something where policy becomes important, right? How we deal with China in many ways determines what type of relationship the U.S. will have with China in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, China, I would say, these days has this kind of a split personality, I would say. That on the one hand, you have China flashing its muscles, with cash all over the place in Africa, in Latin America, acting like newly rich. But on the other hand, Brian talks about nationalism. And that is derived from this incredible paranoia in China. The Chinese government is very, very paranoid in terms of the American intention. From the Chinese point of view, it sees a lot of things the United States is doing is trying to bring down this regime. For instance, selling arms to Taiwan, which China thinks is part of China. Right? The other problems are related to the U.S. support of all the ethnic separatist movements, like Tibet, for instance. The Tibetan government in exile in India has been funded by the U.S. government, and the separatist movement in Xinjiang, which is China's Muslim region, also it's based in the United States and funded by the National Endowment of Democracy, which is related to the U.S. Congress. So, and also the U.S. is actively supporting any dissident or groups or individuals who want to bring down this current government. So from the Chinese point of view, this is really a major problem. And probably a lot of times China's tough stand or unwillingness to cooperate is derived from this kind of paranoia.
Well, can I ask the two of you to contrast, if there is a real contrast to be made, the Bush administration and the Obama administration's approach to China, understandings about China. Do you think there's much of a difference between those two administrations?
There's not much of a difference. I mean, I would say Obama's asked the same things that Bush has asked for, reevaluation of their currency. Perhaps you might say Obama's asked more in the terms of dealing in climate policy for China, but not that much more than Bush asked for. Bush and Obama both sold sophisticated military technology to Taiwan. They both were supporters of Tibet. So, I would say the policy towards China, and this is something that's not unique to just Obama and Bush. Essentially, since we sort of established true relations with China in 1979, all presidents have essentially towed this same line of trying to maintain friendly relations with China, but also pushing China over a range of issues, including its human rights, Taiwan, Tibet, its economic practice, etc. All presidents have sort of straddled this hedging our bets, in which we want to keep China as a friend, but we take policies in case China turns out not to be that way in the future.
I agree with Brian. I think the basic set of issues the two countries have to deal with each other remains the same. Human rights, Tibet, Taiwan. The only difference probably is the environment. The Obama administration is more focused on environmental protection. And I would say the one interesting difference from the years I lived in this country, watching power transition from one administration to another, is that the Bush senior transition seems to be rockier. George W. Bush in the beginning was much more confrontational toward China. When he was interviewed in the beginning of his presidency, he was very tough. He said, if China invades Taiwan, we're gonna protect Taiwan. And he also criticized China for human rights, where the Obama administration seems to have a smooth beginning, but then it turns out that it still has to deal with Taiwan, it still has to deal with Tibet, so the issues seems to be coming out later than in the beginning.
Yeah, and there seems always to be especially when countries at some level are trying to have a working relationship, there's a very delicate diplomatic language that is used. If China is upset with the United States, they may say something that sounds quite forceful, but there are still avenues to maintain a discussion. Same thing happens with the United States. We might be exceedingly upset and speak in open disgust about something a particular nation did, but we find some avenue to get in there and continue discussions. Do you feel that we're in a more or less healthy place right now in terms of China's diplomatic relationship with the U.S. and vice versa?
Healthier relationship. I think so. I think the two countries are getting to know each other a lot more than 20, 30 years ago. On both sides, it's much more open. The information is more available. But oftentimes, what you just said reminds me of what Mao told Nixon some 30, 40 years ago, when the two countries first started talking to each other. Nixon went to China, right, secretly, and talked to Mao. Then, before Nixon left for the U.S., Mao said, "Okay, now we're talking, we're becoming friends, but you have to understand, in our media, we still have to curse you as American imperialism."
Right.
it's healthy in the sense that we get along. I'd say it's healthy in the sense that no one on either side really wants a confrontation. That is, no one in the U.S. seriously wants a military confrontation with China. I think, what the critical issue on both sides is how do we handle each other? That is, in the U.S., the issue is how do we handle China? Do we handle China by trying to be more cooperative with them, by letting them have more responsibility, or do we handle China by trying to contain them to make sure that they don't have recourse to challenge us? And so I think in the sense that it's healthy in the sense that both sides are really trying to figure out how we should interact with each other, but in the same sense that's somewhat unhealthy in the sense that we haven't established, well, it's healthy in the sense that we're not fighting each other, but it's unhealthy in the sense that we're not sure where we're going with our relationship.
I think a lot comes a lot of sense of fear comes from not knowing each other. I think as long as the two countries keep interacting with each other, go into China more, let people come to the U.S. more. We have the largest foreign student group on campus, Chinese. Right? I heard there were close to 1,000 Chinese students on campus. These people are going to go back one day, hopefully they will go back. So they're going to play a role in, I think a lot of times for people who really are feel the urgency to do something, probably my suggestion is slow down and let's wait a little bit. Let these students finish their study and go back and get into power. Maybe they will play a role. So the other thing is what should be done. I would say that the U.S. should at least equal its effort to work within the system than outside the system. Trying to destroy the system from the outside seems to be less effective at this point. The communist government seems to be quite popular. If you do a public opinion poll, you have 80%, 90% of the people showing support of the current government. So it's a quite popular government. Seems to be difficult to destroy it from outside. I think it would be much more effective if the U.S. tries to work within the system, trying to help China develop a legal system, for instance, develop rule of law, to help China develop elections, how to run an election, and which is becoming popular at the very basic level in China. So China needs help in these areas. I think to help China develop the Communist Party into a political party in the modern sense, to get ready for future competitive elections. So these kind of efforts and policies, I believe, will be much more effective, or at least as equally effective, to promote future change and better relationship between the two countries than this kind of policy attacking from outside, supporting dissidents groups, and that's just making things worse, at least from the Chinese point of view.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place for us to stop. It would be interesting to go on much longer. But thank you, Brian Lai. Thank you, Wenfang Tang, for joining us tonight. Thank our guests.
Thank you.
Really wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate it. This is WorldCanvass from International Programs, and I'm Joan Kjaer. Thanks for being with us. The program will be aired locally on UI TV and on KRUI FM in the very near future, so please check the International Programs website for broadcast details. That's accents.international.uiowa.edu. And in this segment, I think we're going to have a nice time talking to three people who spent a lot of time in various parts of Asia. Just next to me here is Dr. Marian Muste from engineering and hydroscience and...
HR, hydroscience and engineering.
And engineering, yeah.
Research unit of the College of Engineering.
Yes, right. And you are from Romania originally.
Yes.
Right, right. And next to him is Michael Schaefer, a graduate student in engineering. And tell us what area of engineering you're studying.
I'm in civil and environmental engineering.
Yeah, great. And Jodie Klein works with me and my colleagues in international programs as a graduate assistant, and she is getting her master's degree very soon here in international studies. And thank you, Jodie, for being with us tonight. So, Marian, I'm going to first turn to you and ask you to talk a little bit about a course that you lead regularly to many different countries overseas, but you've spent a good deal of time in Asia.
We have a unique course on the campus, in the country, and maybe in the world. It is called International Perspectives in Water Resources Science and Management. And the course is unique because it's offered to engineering students, who usually are not so often abroad. The international programs are mostly geared to history, language programs, and so on. But coming up with this course for engineers was a very courageous idea in 1997 when our director, V.C. Patel, recognized that water does not have political boundaries, and most of the action in water resources, water resources, are happening now abroad at this time. And with this recognition, he initiated a course which every year, we try to do it every year, takes students from the campus, from other universities in the world. We have students from Canada, Germany, Uruguay joining our group from Iowa, and going in a country or regions of the world where the action is. So, to give you some examples, we visited Iguazu Fall, which was the largest dam in the world. Then, when Three Gorges Dam was built in China, we take the action, the group there. We visited the Three Gorges in 2007. And then we go, we visit projects which are in the planning stage, projects which are involving more than technical problems, social, environmental, political problems, such that the dam which was planned to be built on Danube between Hungary and Slovakia. Then Narmada project in India, very debated project, and then we visit large rivers. We visited the Nile, we visited Danube, and so on, and we do parallels with our waters and water problems at home. So this course is unique. It's not for engineers. The course always embraces students from other departments, and from we always had from the campus students from environmental engineering, but then urban planning, history, law, and so on, in recognition again that the water resources and the water problems are not technical only. They are very broad and very technical solution actually have to take into account multifaceted aspects of water. So this would be in a nutshell in terms of history of the course. Since '97, we visited India was the first country, then Taiwan, Japan, then China in 2000, then Eastern Europe, Hungary, Romania, Poland, then Argentina 2003, Turkey 2005, China again 2007, because it's really a country where you can see things from a day to another. And then last year in December we visited Egypt. I will mention maybe in the second part about this next offering, which will happen in May this year.
Oh, thank you for the overview, Marian. And Michael, let's connect with you because you have gone on, I guess, 2 of these classes in engineering, and one at least was in China. Can you tell us about your experience traveling with this group?
Sure. The class in China was the first one in 2007 when I was able to participate in I guess Marian really touched on how the focus is, it's not really a technical course. We don't learn how to design water resources projects in this regard, but instead it really focuses on all the non-technical aspects. And I think that's what I really took away from the course, was that all of the complicating factors beyond the technical design that we traditionally focus on in engineering education. And so beyond that, I think the way that the course partners with other universities and local students, I had opportunities to meet and make friends with Chinese students, and actually had an opportunity to host a Chinese student that I met there for a week in Iowa City when they were able to come and visit Iowa. And so it's those kind of connections that were, they're actually long lasting, and I keep in touch with, I think I still keep in touch with 3 Chinese students and currently. And so it's also really cool to be able to visit the things that you might see on TV, like the Three Gorges Dam. We got to take a tour through the locks of the Three Gorges Dam, and to see, how these sorts of engineering projects are really happening, and at the same time being able to experience the culture and all the other things that come along with visiting a place like China.
Jodie Klein is our next guest here, and Jodie has been in Thailand, been in China, and I'm going to ask her to tell us a little bit about those experiences. And your situation is just a little bit different in the sense that you really arranged your own visits abroad and your work with NGOs.
Yeah, I think I'm up here as like the alternative to doing something that's already arranged. But I was a journalism undergraduate, and just wanted to. I had been to Thailand and wanted to have a different experience there, and so I took what skills I had, and I had some friends that did some tsunami relief work after the December 26th in 2007. Now we have to date all of the natural disasters we've had lately. Tsunami doesn't mean, it means a lot of things, but so they had gone and done tsunami relief work, and I just contacted the organization that they were working with and asked if they could use anyone who did communications work, and they said, sure, come on over. And the university, actually went to Iowa State as an undergraduate. The university was able to take that as a credit for an internship, and so I got to learn a lot about intercultural communication. And I was right, the organization I was working with was rebuilding 2 different villages, and so I was kind of right on the ground there and was able to do a lot of correspondence back with donors and helping to document the work they were doing, and just learning a lot the whole time.
Yeah. And so then you spent a year in China working with an orphanage.
Yeah, so after I spent time in Thailand, I really I enjoyed learning the language. It was something I'd never really thought that I would enjoy that much, but I think I liked the fact that it was a tonal language, and it just I enjoyed learning it. So when I came back from Thailand, I thought, well, what can I do if I enjoy learning a tonal language? And everyone said study Mandarin. So I just started studying Chinese, and then after I graduated, I just decided if I wanted to continue studying, and I had to spend time in the country. So I just found a group that was willing to kind of take me on for a year as a volunteer, and I worked. It's called International China Concern, and they work with in partnership with a social welfare system in Changsha and Hunan province. And so I was just able to work with them and stay for a full year. So it was amazing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I'd like to get into with all 3 of you is this sort of personal discovery that you went through, and you were there, your personal reaction to, in this case, we'll just concentrate on Asia. And Marian, you've traveled many, many places and have had more experience in your professional career, but both of you have traveled quite a lot too, and certainly this has to leave an impression. And I wonder if you could tell us about something that was a big surprise to you, either about the place you visited or about yourself and the way you could handle it. Mm-hmm. Marian, let me start with you.
You asked us if these experiences, these visits in general, change our life perspective. I'm a frequent flyer in various places of the world, and maybe that perspective is not changed. I'm keen to meet new people, to see new places, and so on. But definitely, there are memorable experiences from food to social life and other things like that. And lessons. And I would brief a little bit on the lessons which actually comes from Asia. I visited Japan, Korea several times, Thailand for 2 months, then China. So this is my Asian experience from 3 to 2 months in terms of length of stay there. So I sense the environment, the social environment, the environment there. So lessons, one of the big lessons is that it's said that water resources are driven by, first of all, the attitude of people toward nature. And then now we are in a very hot spot with these flood issues. And the best lesson about flood, which I saw, and actually I didn't understand because I come from a completely other culture, was in Thailand, where it was April, May, so the dry season, and I just saw houses, very high houses, with and people sitting under the houses in hammocks, under the sun of the under sun, and I was confused, and I asked somebody, how comes that they have this smart idea to shelter them under the houses from this sun? And they say, oh no, this is because of flooding. This village is flooded regularly every year, and then they actually are moving around with boats in the flooding season. And that was a lesson. And that lesson is not only at the personal level. We see now that our attitude, and it's known that the Western culture attitude toward nature was much more aggressive. It was that kind of attitude where we wanted to control the environment, the nature, to control nature. And it seems that it doesn't work. We kept raising the levies on Mississippi, and we keep rising, and then it's never ending. And Netherlands, UK, they left their levies on and on and on, and they quit. The newest concept in flood mitigation is living with floods. And our course in 2010 will take us in UK and Netherlands to learn what means this for countries which are industrials like us, who put levies in place and so on. And there are some prototype projects in Belgium, in UK, where new concepts, but much more relaxed, much more friendly to nature, are right now in place. So again, the course will take our students where the action is, just because the things are related. Our institute was, in our institute, a flood center for the Iowa State was created, and actually we'll have students working on a day-by-day basis on flood issues coming, visiting UK. Mike is again with us. He could not abstain. He is the third time with us. We are very happy. And we will learn these new concepts, which are very old, seems like.
So, Mike, let's go to you next. And you can talk as much as you like about these experiences and the one coming up with flood, but other kinds of personal realizations you may have had.
Sure. I was also had the opportunity to be an exchange student in South Korea for 1 semester when I was an undergrad. And I think that kind of, before I had traveled and visited places, but it was until I got an opportunity to really live somewhere. And I think maybe Jodie would agree with this, that it's really, it's a lot different when you start to do the day-to-day things and experience a culture like that. It's a much different education than visiting somewhere. And I guess some of the other opportunities, not necessarily in Asia right now, but that I've become involved with as a result of some of these opportunities in Asia, is my involvement with something called Engineers Without Borders, that is trying to have a new way of going about sort of the international development that comes from a professional or a technical stance, and using that in partnership with local communities. And so I'm actually involved with that heavily on campus, and it's also motivated how I plan to do the rest of my research as a graduate student. I started studying in groundwater chemistry, and that's what the focus of my research is on. And through that came to my attention that back to Asia, there's a really large, it's actually the largest mass poisoning in history in West Bengal, in Cambodia, and most of Southeast Asia from arsenic that's contaminated groundwater. And it's all natural, but that's kind of been, it's as a result of sort of development decisions through the last 20 years and not testing water that was assumed to be pure. There's over 100 million people are at risk for arsenic, and this is back to Asia. And I think it's something that, the traveling and being in those places and learning about different cultures that way, it's really motivated what I plan to do. And so now I plan to shift from sort of the traditional research that I've been working on to studying how not only the chemistry and the technical aspects of maybe remediating groundwater, removing it before drinking, but how to do that in a way that's culturally and socially relevant, in the same way that we studied on the courses with Marian. Maybe a lot of those focus on large-scale projects, but I think that my experiences in that way have really motivated me to try to do something about these sorts of problems, both from an engineering and incorporating all of what we might call the other aspects of these projects. And so I think without sort of the travel experiences and the education I received in these sorts of courses, I wouldn't be taking this path. So. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And Jodie, what about you?
Yeah, I guess what he said was really correct, that when you spend a lot of time in a place, you get to understand more than just your first reactions, and you get to break through that phase of the first couple months, and then you reach month 5 and month 6, and your relationship with the culture and the people there just starts to grow so much deeper. And there's just something to be said for celebrating all of the different holidays that people have that are really important to them and mean something. And you can imagine if you're somewhere on December 25th and no one's acting any differently, that you would feel a little bit weird, And so when I'm back here in the States and there's a certain festival where you're supposed to eat a certain kind of dumpling, I can have some sort of an appreciation for the way my Chinese friends want to, gather and celebrate that day. But as far as a kind of a profound moment, I went on my roof on Chinese New Year at midnight, and just to understand what that is like. I mean, I could have read about that in 20 books, but you can't understand the kind of celebration that goes on during Chinese New Year. And I would dare to say that you can't really understand Chinese people without being in China during Chinese New Year. And it's a whole new thing, and it's a different thing to understand than what we can really understand, I think.
Yeah. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of what was it that you began to appreciate by being there? I mean, what was the sense of what were you experiencing on that New Year's?
Well, I mean, not just even on New Year's, but I think as a whole, my language abilities got better. And whereas in Thailand, I was mostly working in English. When I was in China, I was really working in Chinese all day. And so, part of my acclimation to the culture was that for the first couple months, I didn't understand a lot of what was going on around me. But then I think by the end of that time, I think Nelson Mandela said once, if you speak to a man in a language he understands, it goes to his head, but if you speak to him in his language, it goes to his heart. And I think the more deeply you can speak with people, and it was interesting to hear the discussion about the American and Chinese relationships, and here I am, an American girl, this 23-year-old girl that's coming right to their country, and I was in Changsha, Hunan province, which I didn't see any other foreigners all day, for weeks or months. And so here I am, this person they can actually interact with. And I am American culture to them. I'm not a TV or a song, and they can ask me questions. And it just became more and more of a profound experience the more I was able to communicate with them, because most people in Changsha don't really speak very much English at all. And they, in fact, speak their local dialect, which is a whole nother challenge. But being able to explain things to them and talk to them about my culture and what it means, for me to be American, or what I think about their culture and what I appreciate. I think a lot of people were really amazed that you like Chinese food. You like to go sing karaoke with us. Like, we didn't know if Americans would like that, and they just have this concept of America as really one-dimensional. Just because it's when something's portrayed by the media, it doesn't really come to life, and so I think that became more profound as I was able to interact with people.
And it has really changed your plans for your future, hasn't it? I know you're just about ready to graduate with your master's, and what are you planning on doing?
I really have been interested in international development work in general, and it's very interesting to learn about all the things University of Iowa has going on, different relationships and courses that they offer, and just coming up with different solutions for some of these societal problems, like they were talking about with China. The size and just the sheer propensity of some of the societal problems going on in China are not easily solvable, and they're really hard to keep up with. So there's going to be a lot of changes in the future as they become more economically able to, just develop more healthily as a culture and some of their societal needs. So I've just been interested in that, and probably going to continue along that path. And I mean, if I had never gone to Thailand and had that initial experience overseas and started understanding what intercultural communication really, what that means. It doesn't really sound that fun, but it's actually, just understanding everything that goes into that. I probably never would have decided to study Chinese, and I certainly wouldn't be doing what I do now.
Yeah. And I would think it must have been a little bit intimidating for you, or maybe for your family, to know that you bought a one-way ticket to go to China, and you said, I'll be back when I'm back, and you developed the entire thing yourself with really not a support system in China other than the people you met once you were there.
There was, I lived in the same apartment complex as the foreigners, and some of them had lived there for 8 years, mostly Australians and some Canadians, actually, not any other Americans, but just with this particular group. But I guess I didn't really have that. I mean, you can always get back a one-way ticket. It's just because I didn't know exactly when I was going to be coming back. But my mom and my sister actually came and visited me. I think my family was really surprised that I decided to do that. And then about 6 or 7 months in, they might have started missing me or something. So I think they came and visited me, and they were just blown away. I think the generosity of Chinese people is something that just blows you away when you arrive. And so my mom really enjoyed it. It was fun.
Did you have something you were going to say, Michael? Oh, I thought there was a moment of recognition there. Yeah.
I like to. So these social interactions are very valuable for the course. I mean, are very, very strong memories for our students. And I would like Mike to refer to the beautiful event which was organized by our Chinese in Wuhan. It was incredible, and maybe you can describe better than me. We have these interactions, faculty, students, including competition where we got beaten by Chinese in basketball, and of course tennis, table tennis, and so on. But if you can shortly mention that event was fantastic.
Yeah, I think so. We were hosted at Wuhan University, and when we first arrived, we had actually prepared. Part of my project for the course was to prepare a short presentation about Iowa, to introduce Iowa to the Chinese students that we were meeting with, and that brought on a big discussion. There are certainly a lot of differences in how how the courses are taken, and free time especially. And then, so that was an interesting discussion. And then that evening, we had a sort of a welcoming dinner, and we were expecting sort of to have dinner and then be on our way. But our host had prepared about a 2.5-hour program, including student groups from all over campus. There were demonstrations of traditional music, traditional dance, martial arts presentations, and then introduction to traditional games. And it was an entire, cross-section of the traditional, culture and history of China that we were presented. I think we were all humbled at the time. We were a group of about 20 Americans, and they basically brought in the best of the university to share with us. And all we had prepared was a PowerPoint slide to introduce, Kinnick Stadium and what does that mean
and
in
very
Iowa City.
quickly, Americans were on the podium and competing in games set together. It was wonderful.
Oh, thanks for sharing all this with us. Jodie Klein, thank you very much. And Michael Schaefer and Marian Muste, thank you very much. And good luck with all these future travels. Thanks so much. Please thank our guests. So now, in this final segment, this is going to be a real treat. Many of you, if you're from the University of Iowa or from Iowa City, may know Timothy Barrett. Timothy Barrett is going to be joining us just now. He's with me here on the stage and has had a long, long history here working at the University of Iowa. And he's been the director of the Center for the Book for a few years, and now he's currently a research scientist and adjunct professor there. He is an expert paper maker, and we'll talk all about that. But you may also have read about a very a fine recognition, a level of recognition that he received this last September when Timothy Barrett was made a MacArthur Fellow. One of the Genius Grants came to Timothy Barrett, and boy, is that worthy of note. Thank you for staying with us here at the University of Iowa. I mean, it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime of exceptional work, and really nice, I'm sure, to have that kind of recognition. But I should ask you about that phone call. I mean, what was that like when you heard about this?
You can imagine, when I was growing up as a kid, there used to be this show on, some of you may be familiar with, called The Millionaire.
Oh yeah.
A guy comes to the door, and it's kind of like that. But it was weird because the guy says, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "No, but I will." And turns, we've received a MacArthur Award. Now, don't tell anyone about this. You must not tell anyone for 8 days. You can tell your wife, but you can't tell anyone else. My wife said on the phone, "You're kidding." I said, "No, I'm not. I just got a MacArthur Award." "You're joking. You are pulling my leg." I said, "Come on, wife." Anyway, no, I have to say that I really don't think I would have received that award if it hadn't been for being at this university since 1986, and in a very real sense, if it hadn't been for some particular exchanges I had with Asian papermakers when I was studying papermaking in Japan. And let me just tell you a little bit about that. I think I'd like to start just by explaining papermaking in a very basic way, hand papermaking. This is done with a rectangular sieve-like device called a mold. It's usually a stretched wire or a stretched fabric surface in a wooden frame. And that's dipped into a vat of beaten cellulose fiber and water. And it's brought out horizontal, so you have an even layer of pulp distributed on the surface of the mold. At that point, you can stand it up in the sun and let it dry, or turn it upside down and transfer it to a wet felt or piece of cloth so that the mold is freed for forming another sheet. This technique of making paper, we think, was developed in China around the beginning of the Common Era. But we're not sure when this happened, around the year 600, 700, Asian paper makers discovered that if you added a viscous solution to the vat, you could produce very thin, long-fibered papers. And this is the technique used in Japan and other Asian countries for making what we commonly refer to as rice paper. It turns out it's a misnomer, like French toast or English muffin. There's no rice. The paper's made from cellulose fiber. But this particular technique was fascinating to people in the West because it wasn't well understood. And I was very interested in going to Japan to learn about this technique. I was also fascinated by certain aesthetic properties in Japanese handmade paper. It had a kind of warmth that modern handmade paper or Western handmade paper, machine-made paper didn't have. When I got to Japan and started to look into it more, there was a certain crazy combination of softness and crispness in the same piece of paper. It had a luster about it that was really wonderful. And I applied for and was lucky enough to receive this Fulbright fellowship and went to Japan. I was 25 years old. I was green as can be, but I was having a fantastic time. It was an amazing experience to be able to travel around the country, have money to spend on slide film and on books, and come back after visiting paper-making places all around the country, come back to Tokyo, and the Fulbright people would have deposited more money in your bank account. You know, it was, have blinders on, and to be able to focus on this was just fascinating. Well, I was going along for, I don't know, 6 months or a year doing this, totally enchanted, and it gradually started to become clear to me that the reason that some of these papers have this quality, and there were many Japanese handmade papers that didn't embody these characteristics. The reason they existed in some papers had to do with traditional techniques, materials, and workmanship. And I had a very important meeting one evening with not a national living treasure, but his apprentice, a young Japanese guy named Katsutada Hiko, who was one of these unusual people, very, very charismatic, but very accessible at the same time. He took an interest in me. And one night we were talking about this, and I said, you know, it just seems more and more apparent to me that these traditional techniques are where these aesthetic properties come from, where this luster and shine comes from, and why this paper feels the way it does. And he said it was Barretto-san. That's as close as you can get to Mr. Barrett in Japanese, Barretto-san. You got to understand that the techniques used to make that kind of paper are never going to be practiced again on that same kind of economic scale. Things have completely changed. But that's why it's crucial that you and I and other young people who are interested in this craft learn these techniques from the old people who still remember them, because if we don't, they're going to be lost forever, and it's going to be our fault. Now, I didn't think about it at that particular moment, but over the course of the next few months, it really hit me that for the first time in my life, you know, I may have a role to play in this whole story. You know, the notion that you can be the interface between the past and the future in your given field of study may be the moment when your career is revealed to you, when a person becomes a professional. The idea that you can actually make a contribution potentially in a big way is something that had never occurred to me. So it really impacted me the time there in Japan. I began to realize later that this close analysis of the materials and techniques used to make a given paper can reveal a lot about its aesthetic properties, and that has turned out to be the formula that I've followed in my analysis of 15th century European papers. It's really directed my whole career, and it was a very, very important time for me. I was, 25, 26 years old, and didn't realize what was happening to me at the moment, but it had a profound effect on me. I'd just like to say that I've really enjoyed all these presentations this evening. They've run the gamut, but the things that really have hit me concern the importance of international study. You go to a foreign country, you think, because you want to learn about their technique of papermaking, or you want to learn about them. But the most valuable things you learn about are about yourself and your own country because of the perspective and the European papermaking technique. The other thing that really hits me about this is this talk of war, if you will, and let's make no mistake about it. We may not be in the middle of a Cold War right now, but there are thousands of nuclear missiles sitting in silos and onboard submarines all around the world. These kinds of fears about China are real. we have not learned how to get around this. And when I came back from Japan, I, for some reason, wrote a letter to Senator William Fulbright. He was still alive at the time. And I said, you know, I just had this incredible experience in Japan. I just want you to know that I think this kind of program does more for international world peace than all the nuclear disarmament conferences in the world. And he wrote me a letter back. And he said, that's exactly why we started that program. The other thing that comes to mind in listening to people talk tonight is my father's dead now, but he was involved in the Normandy landing, not on the ground. He was in the Navy on a subchaser, second in command on a subchaser, and they were involved in leading landing craft in and helping ships find docks and so on after the initial assault. And he said that when it was all over, during the next 2 or 3 days, they were at docks in France, and that there were all these ships, all these troop transports, commandeered ocean liners and stuff that had been used to move troops all over the place. And he said he suddenly had the overwhelming feeling that they should send them all over the place, all over the world, and load them up with young men and women and ship them to some other place in the world and offload them so they could all fall in love with each other. And he was really serious about this. I mean, it was his response to having been through 4 years of war. And I think when you've heard a lot of us speak about our experiences in foreign countries, you know, it's this whole internationalization of the world, globalization of the world is misleading because people think, well, you know we can find out anything we want to about Iran. The internet now allows us to go there in a way, but that's not the same, as you've heard people say tonight, as sitting down and breaking bread or sharing a bowl of rice with somebody, or getting mildly inebriated with their drink of choice, or real inebriated, meeting their kids and spending a long time there. And I think it's really, really important that we find more and more ways to do this, because it makes it really hard to go home and see that other country as a potential enemy. And I think that's a wonderful thing about the program today. I've been very pleased to be involved. So.
Wow. Well, and you know, obviously I echo everything you're saying and thank all of our guests who've been here tonight, but I would like to just ask you one question, which maybe after that very moving comment will seem a little out of place, but why was paper the passion, or is paper making a passion in your life? And why has it been the thing you've centered on?
What's his name? Public Radio, Dean Borg, said to me the day I got to MacArthur, his lead line was, "You mean you really make paper by hand?" And all my colleagues in the Center for the Book thought it was such an offhand thing to say, but I thought it was a perfectly good question. I said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, we do. We make two kinds, and we have two different places where it happens, and I just launched off. I always enjoyed making things with my hands as a teenager. My father was a professor of English and American literature. And he knew enough about the history of books and paper making to be, when I asked one day, how did they make paper before the invention of the paper machine? Now, it's important to point out, that was 1800. Paper machine, 1800. So invention of hand paper making, beginning of the Common Era. For 18 centuries, every piece of paper in the world was made by hand. If you're in our used bookstore, anything printed before 1800, guaranteed to be on handmade paper. I don't care where it came from. Interesting way to collect handmade paper. A lot of people don't realize that. Anyway, I asked my dad how it was done. He happened to know. He described exactly what I've just described to you, this rectangular device, each sheet being made by hand. That made me curious. In high school, I did a little bit of reading, discovered the work of a man named Dard Hunter, who turns out to be the guiding light and the grandfather of this whole field of study. In fact, you can get his book over at Prairie Lights, about $17. It's the Bible for people interested in hand paper making. papermaking, history and technique of an ancient craft. And I cracked that open and I thought, oh my goodness, this is an amazing story. One thing about Dart Hunter, though, he never described in any real detail exactly how to do it. You know, he went to Japan, he had lots of photographs, he sort of described, you know, more or less how it's done. But for me, it was like, yeah, but how do I just do it? And so that was why I spent 2 years in Japan studying the technique. And but I think it wasn't until I was in Japan for a while that I decided I could spend the rest of my life trying to uncover the reasons behind certain aesthetic properties in handmade paper. Now, I had no idea how I was going to make a living at it.
Yeah.
And it is thanks to a number of people, administrators at this university, Kim Merker in particular, that I've ended up here with the position I have. And as I say, if that all hadn't happened, no MacArthur, I guarantee it. I'd still be working in my parents' barn in Michigan, so I'm trying to eke out a living.
Yeah. Well, one final thing we could talk about is the paper that you and others made for the Declaration of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
Well, it's kind of an interesting story because Don Etherington, who's a British paper conservator, was part of the team that was involved in writing specifications for the re-encasement of the Charters of Freedom. So there's the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution. We're going to be rehoused in state-of-the-art enclosures where they evacuate the air and put an inert gas in, like argon. And he called because they were interested in including a piece of paper underneath these documents. But they weren't sure how much they were going to need for each enclosure because it had to do with the total amount of humidity in the enclosure and so on. He said, well, how would you approach this with us if we asked you to do it? And I said, well, how about if we were to make a relatively large number of sheets of very traditionally made Japanese paper, and you could then select however many layers you needed for that particular encasement based on the mass of the parchment and so on. And he said, come on, Tim, can't you come up with something more American? I mean, jeez. Because I was proposing this traditional Japanese paper. I said, well, you know, as a matter of fact, we have been experimenting with some textile quality cotton grown in Georgia that allows us to make a very white paper without the use of chemical bleaches. And he said, yes, that's that. Now we're talking. I think we'd like to get a proposal from you. Maybe this might work out. So in any case, one thing led to another. And it's now quite something. If you haven't been to the National Archives Rotunda in Washington, you have a chance to go. You have to wait your turn in line. But because of the way the new encasements are set up, anyone, including people on wheelchairs, can move right up and you can get your face very close to these documents. And only people from Iowa know that if you move your head over to the side a little bit, underneath you can see a piece of paper that was made in Iowa City, Iowa. So.
Well, this is Tim Barrett. Please say thank you to him for being with us tonight. Thank you. And I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. As you know, this program is produced by International Programs and is taped by University of Iowa Television and KRUI, and broadcast schedule will be listed on our website, which is accents.international.uiowa.edu. Our program couldn't have come together without the good humor and friendship of my colleagues in International Programs, especially Gerhild Kropp, Amy Green, Jodie Klein, Emily Lewis, David Rogers, and Chris Clough. Our next program will be on Friday, April 9th, and the subject that evening will be Latin America, lots of music, lots of arts, and political discussion as well. So please join us. That's April 9th. Thanks for coming. Good night.